All right, good morning. Let's start the immune system. So this is going to be the first of 3 days. My cat is really trying to get into the door right now. So I'm really sorry about all of the noise. Now the two cats are going to wrestle outside. Oh boy. Okay. Anyway, hi. Let's do the first of 3 days of immune system notes. This is going to be really relevant to what's going on today and all over the place. And so this is going to be an interesting chance for you to kind of solidify some of the things that you may know, or learn some new things that may affect how you think about like the news cycle. Let's start out by talking about life. All life can be categorized into 3 domains. And those domains are called archaea, prokarya, and eukarya. Now, the reason why we're talking about life is because when we talk about our immune system, we have to talk about things that can cause diseases. And most of these things are living. Okay? And these living things fall under some different categories here. Now, archaeans, I'm not aware of any diseases caused by archaeans, because archaeans are bacteria that need really extreme environments to survive, like really hot environments, really salty environments, environments really dense in certain metals or things like that. And those conditions just don't really exist in our bodies, and so they don't really cause diseases in us. However, prokarya, these are bacteria, and bacteria, as we know, can cause all kinds of diseases. Now, let's introduce a new word. This new word is pathogen. And a pathogen is any disease-causing agent that disrupts normal physiology. All right. Now, there are bacteria that can be pathogens. And these bacteria normally these bacteria are fine. I mean, we get along with E. coli bacteria in our gut. We get along with a lot of staph bacteria on our skin, things like that. But there are some bacteria that can cause diseases. These are diseases like, that you probably already heard of, cholera, tuberculosis, the plague, syphilis, anthrax. I picked out some ones that I thought maybe you guys may have heard of. Each of these may be caused by a different species of bacteria. And these bacteria, remember, are prokaryotic cells, and the reason that they cause diseases could be a few different things. For example, they may compete for space and nutrition inside of your bodies. And so if you're not getting your nutrition, that could be what's causing the disease. They may produce toxins, and they either may release them while they're alive, or, it should be while alive, or they may be released when destroyed, I should say. And the problem with toxins is that these are molecules, which means they don't have life, and they're not really something that you can, fight off. And so even if they die, if those toxins are released, it can cause a problem in the body. All right, let's go into eukarya here. Now, eukaryotes can be divided into all kinds of things. There are protists, and protists are these little, normally single-celled molecules, things that you might find like living in pond water, and things like that. You may have looked at them under a microscope sometime, but these can cause diseases like malaria. Have you ever heard of, if you go to this country, don't drink the water? That's because there's a protist called amoeba that live in the water, and it can cause a disease called dysentery. And then there's a protist that if it gets inside of your blood, specifically this happens in Africa, you can get something called African sleeping sickness. Okay. Other branches of eukarya involve plants, fungi, and fungi can also cause diseases. Fungi can cause diseases like yeast infections, ringworm. That's a really common one in kids. There's something called thrush, too, that can happen if you get an yeast infection in your throat. And another branch of eukarya are animals. Now, animals includes lots of different things. I mean, you know that we've got the vertebrates, things with nerves that run down their back. Animals can also include arthropods. Arthropods are all kinds of things like, what's the word I'm looking for? Lobsters, crabs, bugs, insects, spiders, scorpions, millipede, all that kind of stuff. This can also include different varieties of worm. Animals can also include all kinds of things like corals and jellyfish, all of which sting each other or sting other things. There's all kinds of other things. We'll go into detail in the next optional unit, okay? But there are, in the area of arthropods, things that can cause diseases like lice or scabies. In the worm family, you can get things like tapeworm, pinworm, guinea worm. And these are all things that can cause problems inside of the bodies too. So these are all examples of pathogens. Now, these are all things that fall under the category, though, of life. There are also non-living pathogens. So non-living pathogens. And maybe there's a pretty conspicuous little guy that's missing from this list. And those are viruses. Viruses can cause things like AIDS, chickenpox, the flu, herpes, HPV, which are genital warts, mumps, shingles, pneumonia. A lot of really bad diseases. Now, viruses aren't considered to be alive because they have, and this is really important to know, they have no metabolism. If you flip way back in your notes to our first day of real notes, we learned that metabolism are the chemical reactions inside of cells. They can be catabolic or anabolic. Viruses don't have these. Viruses are normally just a little shape that surrounds some DNA or RNA. And those, those just cause all kinds of problems. But they're really hard to fight because they don't have any chemical reactions inside of them that we can stop. All right. And then one other non-living thing is something called a prion. Prions are really interesting. And these cause really big problems. The couple of diseases that prions cause that you have probably heard of, maybe mad cow disease, aka bovine spongiform encephalitis, rabies, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and Kuru. Now prions are real crazy. A prion is just a protein that has folded into a structure that can cause diseases, but this misfolded protein can then cause other proteins to misfold, which then cause diseases. Really interesting little thing. All right. So those are pathogens. Now, a pathogen is a disease-causing agent. We say agent because we can't say organism because remember that viruses aren't living. Viruses aren't living, and an organism is a living thing. And so when we say agent, we are just saying something that can cause a disease. And a disease is a disruption to your normal physiology. Your physiology are all of those reactions and processes that keep you alive. All right, so let's talk about your lines of defense. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Your lines of defense. So this is ways that you can defend yourself against the entry of a pathogen into your body. So your first line of defense are physical barriers and chemical barriers like your skin, mucous membranes, and different secretions on your skin and mucous membranes. So these could be physical barriers. And that's just, like a wall. I mean, you have skin which protects the inside of your bodies from things getting in there. You also have chemical barriers. What do we mean by a chemical barrier? Well, a chemical barrier might mean, let's do a couple examples here. Your tears contain an enzyme called lysozyme. And you remember that lyse means to break. And so one of the reasons your eyes tear up when they're exposed to something is that those tears contain lysozyme to try to break things apart and destroy things so that they don't get into your eyes. Your mucous membranes, and mucous membranes are those sort of wet surfaces. We could be talking about the inside of your mouth and nose. We could be talking about the linings of your urethra or the vagina. Those mucous membranes contain a pH that is not very favorable to things living on it, which is really good. Your stomach also is your stomach is very acidic, and that helps to get rid of bacteria and things that might be on the foods that you eat. All right, and the cat's back. You have, let's see, what's another physical barrier? I know what another physical thing is remember that you have cilia that move stuff up and out of your lungs, and that is also helpful as well. All right, so that's your first line of defense, is just stopping stuff from getting in. Now, your other two lines of defense, we're going to go into more detail in the next couple of days, but let's just outline them really quick right here. Your second line of defense are phagocytes, and remember that phago means to like engulf. Antimicrobial proteins, like antibodies. Your body, when it tries to fight something off, inflames. You know this before whenever you've had a cut swell up. That is a very specific chemical response to try to get rid of some things. And then finally, you develop a fever. Now, all of these things right here, your first and second lines of defense, are what we call innate immunity. And that means they're non-specific. And non-specific means that they're just there to target everything from getting in and not looking for very specific organisms. For example, the mucous membrane in the vagina is not there to fight off specific forms of bacteria. Rather, any form of bacteria or yeast or whatever the case may be. All right, so finally, let's go to our last line of defense. This is where your body produces very specific antibodies. This is where your body has certain cells called lymphocytes, which we'll learn a little bit more about tomorrow. And then finally, your body actually makes these cells that we call memory cells, which retain memories for how to fight off very specific diseases. Now this right here, this is called adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity is very specific for certain things. All right, so we're going to talk a lot more about numbers 2 and 3 tomorrow. We only have one more thing to talk about today, and that is one of your physical lines of defense that we haven't mentioned yet. And that physical line of defense that we haven't mentioned yet are blood clots. What happens if you do cut that physical membrane? If you cut that physical barrier and stuff can come in, well, your body has to have a way to block that off so that dangerous stuff doesn't get in. So blood clot not only prevents blood loss, but it also limits the pathogen from accessing your body. It's really good. We don't want it to get into the bloodstream. Okay. So blood clots are really cool. They're kind of like little nets that spread across a cut in a blood vessel, and they capture a bunch of blood cells and harden to prevent a new barrier. All right. This involves two parts of your blood. Part one are platelets. So what is a platelet? Well, a platelet is just a small little disc-shaped piece of a cell, no nucleus, and it contains a whole bunch of proteins that are involved in clotting. So it is a small, disc-shaped. They don't even call it a whole cell. They call it a cell fragment because it doesn't contain a lot of the stuff that a cell does. No nucleus, but it contains lots of proteins. And that should be lots of proteins involved in clotting. And then the other thing is fibrin. Now, fibrin ends in "in", so that's a protein. But it's a protein that is insoluble protein that forms fibers to trap blood cells. Okay. How does this work? So look at this great diagram of how this works. If you like any of these diagrams, let me know. I will send you the pictures. If you have access to a printer, you could print them out and put them in your notebooks, okay? So we've got our, let's go to black. We've got our red blood cells here, and here's our platelets here. Remember, these are little pieces of cells, not whole cells. So blood vessel breaks open, and a bunch of clotting factors get released. Now, clotting factors are just molecules, and these are released from damaged cells. You can kind of think of them as like red flags. As soon as these cells get broken, if other cells detect these things, that's a signal that, oh my gosh, there's a problem. And doctors are able to use this sort of idea to try to figure out if something is wrong inside of you without actually cutting you open. For example, I just went in because I had some real tightness in my chest. I was just a little worried about it, but turned out to be nothing. And when they did a blood test, they were looking for a specific molecule called troponin, which is only found in heart cells. And if you suffer any kind of heart damage and those cells break open and release their environments into the blood, you should be able to detect troponin in a blood sample. There was none in mine, and so therefore I didn't have a heart attack, which is good. All right, so we've got this clotting factor that gets released, and prothrombin, also a protein because it ends in "in", is just floating around in your blood normally. This is one of those proteins that is found in your blood. I'd also like to comment that I did a really good job right here of lining that line up exactly on the border of this shape, and I think that needs to be recognized. All right. Now, those clotting factors react with the prothrombin just floating around your blood, and it turns the prothrombin into a new protein called thrombin. So this is a new molecule. And that thrombin then reacts with fibrinogen, which is another protein that is just floating in the blood. Now, it's soluble normally, which is why you don't form blood clots normally, because this fibrinogen stays dissolved in your blood and it can't come out unless this thrombin reacts with it, and that turns the soluble fibrinogen into insoluble fibrin. Now this fibrin can't dissolve in your blood, and it forms this net. So these little lines that you see here, these are all strands of fibrin that capture these red blood cells and platelets. This clot is insoluble, so blood can't get through it, so it all stays in there. And now any pathogens that may have been exposed to your blood can't get in. I've got a great picture of a microscope image of a blood clot here. Let's grab it. All right. So this is a really great picture. You can see the fibrin strands as all these like webby kind of net-looking things, and you can see the red blood cells that are being trapped in there. All right, really, really, really cool image. This had to be colored using a computer so that you could see the different things. These kinds of images are not normally colored. Okay, and then remember, I want you to think back to what we learned last week about atheromas, which are those fatty deposits in your arteries that can reduce the diameter of the lumen, and how those plaques that they form can rupture and trigger blood clots, which can block your blood flow on the inside of your bodies. You don't want internal blood clots. You do want external blood clots. Okay, that's it for today. Tomorrow we're going to get real specific about some of these immunities. Tomorrow we're going to go into a lot more detail about what happens in this secondary line of defense. And then on Thursday we will do the third line of defense, which is the adaptive immunity. We'll learn about antibiotics and why you can't take antibiotics for a cold or a flu, and what some of the things antibiotics do are. All right. Everybody stay safe.